Hi, my name is Toni Dachis, and we're going to be making mittens out of recycled sweaters today. You can start with also, old sweaters that you wanted to probably give away or throw away. The more wool that's in them, the better. 100% wool is what would be recommended. And you want to have at least 3 different patterns probably going, or colors, so that you can mix and match. And actually, you don't want to match. You want to just mix it all up. The busier, really, the better it is. So go raid your closet. All right, once you have downloaded and printed your PDF file of the pattern, which comes in 3 sizes basically, the small, medium, and large. There probably are not any men that would wear a small, but some children could probably fit into a small, like maybe a teen or something like that. So basically the green line is the large, the red line is the medium, and the black line, of course, is the small. So you are going to want to cut out your pattern according to whatever size it is that you're going to make. I've already cut these 2 out, and basically just cut right on the line of the size that you want. So there you have these 3 pieces. You're also going to need cuffs. And cuffs are basically, the best is if you can cut the cuff off of the sweater that you're using, because that comes already ribbed, already finished on the edge. This has a finished edge where it will not unravel. This edge has been cut, so you can see when you stretch it, it could come undone. But what I've done on all sweaters is I've pre-washed them, and you do that in hot water with soap, and you want to dry it on as hot a temperature as you can. So what it does is it felts the fibers, and they shrink and they twist and they turn, kind of like if you have tangled hair. And that's what the fibers do when they're washed in hot water. And wool does it more than anything, because the hot water makes the fibers expand, and then they get even more tangled. You want it to shrink, so that's why wool is better also. All right, so you're going to need 2 cuffs, of course, and this one, which is going to work for a small, you basically want to cut something about 8 or 9 inches wide if you're cutting, say, from the bottom. This is already a cuff, so it's already finished exactly to how I want it. Now this piece was cut from the bottom of a rolled edge sweater, and this is 9 inches wide, and it's about 4 inches tall for your cuff. I'm going to have to sew this together and seam, make a seam here, turn it inside out, so that I have my other cuff. So when you have cut all your pieces out, it says cut 2 of each of your sweater, and it says cut 2 for your fleece lining. So you also need fleece lining, which will give it added warmth, and it's basically, this is really inexpensive. You can get this at almost any fabric store, and it won't unravel here. So you're going to cut out 2 of everything, 2 backs of the hand, 2 palms, 2 bottoms of the palm, and then the same for each of the lining. And of course you need 2 cuffs. You don't need lining for the cuffs. They're going to be your finished edge. All right, so if you have all your pieces cut out, you should end up with what looks something like this. Here are the pieces for the lining, and here is the, like the front of the hand. And if you start putting this, kind of laying it out so that it's the way it's going to be put together, to make sure you have a right and a left hand, it's really very important, because otherwise you end up having 2 of the same hand. So there's our fleece lining for the left and the right hand, and here is going to be our mitten, the outside. So I'm just kind of laying it together so that I make sure I have all my pieces and they're in the right places that they're going to be when I sew them together. All right, one little thing that I'm going to do today that I don't always do, but it's a really kind of fun little embellishment, is I like to put this little pocket on the outside of one of the hands. Actually, it will be on this side. You'll see when I do that. But so I've cut this little tiny pocket out. I've already made my buttonhole because I'm going to put a button in there too. So now we have that. We're ready to begin sewing. All right, when you begin your sewing, you're going to want to keep all your seam allowances approximately, well, exactly the same size. And so what I do is I basically just line up the edges of my fabric with the presser foot, and it gives me a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So that's kind of what I've based it on. You're certainly welcome to change that if you want it a little more roomy, or if you're used to doing something else. But that way you don't have to mark your where you're going to be sewing your seams. It just can line up with the presser foot. All right, we're going to start though, before I do any seams, we're going to start by putting on the little pocket that I told you about, because it's a lot easier to do it before you have sewn any pieces together. So I'm going to zigzag this with a zigzag stitch so that I don't have to worry about the edges unraveling. And because the fabric has been pre-shrunk and felted, that also keeps it from unraveling. I always give a little back stitch at the beginning and the end to secure it. All right, now we need to sew together the palm side. So I'm going to put right sides together. So I'm flipping that, and so that I don't get confused for the other hand, I'm going to flip that right now so that I don't make the mistake of making two of the same hands. So now I have my right sides together. And I'm going to sew this one first though. Lining up my edge of my fabric with my presser foot gives me my 1/2 inch. Whoops. And with a straight stitch, all right, now with a straight stitch, you're gonna stitch from the beginning of before you get to that curve. You start there. You just look at the shape of this. Start stitching all the way around the thumb, but you're going to stop directly across from where you started. So if you just kind of draw a little line with your eye from where you started here, straight across. You could mark it even with a pin if you want to make sure you stop there. We're going to stitch to that pin, back stitch, and now we have those two pieces together. You're going to want to trim this part close and clip the curves close to the stitching so that when you turn it, you'll have a smooth line. You also want to clip into this curve here. All right, so now we can turn that inside out. This would be a good time to press with a hot iron. Press that seam that you just sewed. After you've pressed that, then you put the right sides together on the front of your mitten and the piece you just sewed for the palms. Now at this point you may want to pin it together so that it doesn't slide around too much when you sew. And it would be good to work on the side where the two pieces have been joined rather than that side, just so that you can control when you get to this part. All right, so now we're ready to sew those two together. Now when you get to this section where where you're going to come to where that thumb piece is, you want to lay that out nice and flat so that you sew across the seam that you previously made. And you'll trim and clip this seam the same as you did with the other seam. And clip your curves. Turn that inside out, and we now have the outside of our left mitten. And you'll want to press this with a hot iron too. All right, and then you do the same with the other mitten to get your right hand, and you'll do the same with the lining too. On the lining, you might want to bring your seam allowance in a little bit tighter because it is going to be on the inside of the mitten. There really is no right and wrong side to the fleece, which is kind of nice. There's a little forgiveness there, but make sure you do a right and a left hand. That you need to make sure. Then on the fleece lining, you're going to want to trim. You don't have to clip the curves because they do not get turned inside out. They stay exactly how they are, but you will want to trim. You will want to trim what you've sewed just to make a nice clean edge, and so that it can go up tight on the inside of the outside of the mitten. So you'll trim all those seams that you made on the lining. Now you take the lining, I'm using the left mitten right now, the inside of the left mitten, and you put it on your hand, and you put it inside the mitten of the actual mitten, and you just kind of line those up so that they're nice and flat on the inside and comfy and warm. So that now everything lines up at the bottom here. And we'll put on our cuff next. I'm going to use this as my cuff, which I have to sew those edges because it's not a cuff from an armband, but it's from the bottom of a sweater. And trim that seam. Okay, we're ready to put the cuffs on our mittens. And what I've done here is I have inserted the cuff on the inside of the mitten. And here I'm going to show you on this one. Basically, you're taking the right side of the cuff, putting it inside the mitten. So you want the right side touching the inside of the mitten. So if your hand is in there, the wrong side of the cuff is there. And if there's a seam on the cuff, I try to line it up with the seam of the mitten. None of that is that critical, but just out of neatness. Try to line up your edges, your raw edges, as well as you can. And then we're going to stitch around the inside there. There might be a little bit of shifting on here, but just make sure you get all 3 layers caught in this seam. And stretch it out, I mean, not a lot, but give it a little bit of pull as you're stitching, so that any difference between the cuff and the mitten all gets absorbed and evenly spread. All right, now we can trim this seam. I want to get this one pretty close, and if you have a real thick, one of the fabrics are real thick, you may want to trim that at a different level so that it feels a little bit better in the end. Turn this out, cuff it over, even it out, and then you get this nice finished edge on the inside as well as a nice cuff on the outside. There is your finished mitten, right hand.